Okay, so now that the geometry is all done with our Animal Crossing figure, we need to dive in here and get into first UV mapping and then texture painting. So UV mapping involves, UVs I should describe are the lines that travel in the direction sort of in X and Y local to the geometry. They just call them U and V because X, Y, and Z are already taken. So we want to be able to take this form that has a complex 3D shape and take all of the faces and then flatten them out on top of an image that we can then paint on. So we get this weird distorted flat image, but when it wraps around the model, it should turn out perfectly fine. So step one is I'm going to come up here into the upper right hand corner of my window until I get that cross. And if I drag to the left, I'll open up an additional 3D viewport just because that's what I happen to be basing this on. Instead of a 3D viewport, we want to move down to UV editor. At first there's nothing here, so I'll go to new, and if I want I can just call this hippo. And depending on the tutorial you watch, there are different resolutions that different people favor. Because we're not going out to a video game engine or something like this, it's not really that important, but I think at the very least we should work with about 2000 pixels. Instead of worrying about the color in this case, I'm going to go down to generated type and select UV grid and then hit OK. And that's going to give me this big grid that'll just give me a sense of how much distortion we have on the surface of our model. So I get something that looks like that. Lastly, I'll go up to image and then I'll say save as. And I'll just stick this here on the desktop called hippo.png. Save image as. Great. Okay, now we want to apply this image to our hippo's skin. I'm just going to leave the pants as a raw material, and the hippo already has a material applied. We can see that over here if we have one of these clicked on, for example. So the nice thing now is that I can just change that material in one spot, but it's going to update to both places on the body, right? So in the past when we've used a material, and maybe I'll just retitle this one hippo as well, we've used a base color and in some cases subsurface and so forth. So a material has to be applied for this to work. I'm going to go over here and click on this little yellow circle that's to the left-hand side of the base color. It was a real pain to find this originally. And then go to texture and down to image texture. And so initially this is just going to shift to show me that something's going on because there's an image has not yet been applied, so I have to hit open. And then I'll navigate to hippo.png and open that image, and that should apply these squares right here after we do one more step, which is known as unwrapping. Okay, so right now I'm in object mode. I'm going to shift select both my head and my body. I'll tab over to edit mode, and then now I have to pick what are known as seams. So we can't just really tell this thing to unwrap wherever it wants to go. Sometimes I think it'll even prevent you from doing it, but you can unwrap well and you can unwrap poorly. So it works out best if we really lay out exactly how we want this thing to unwrap. So first let's grab the head. I'll temporarily just hide the body here. We have this menu up here is going to be partially hidden. I can drag it back and forth with my pen to get access to all those options. So I want to make sure that X-ray is turned on, and it is. I'll grab box selection mode, and then I'll just come down here and with the edge selection type, it gets a little tough when you have to move that menu back and forth. I'll select that edge and then hit Control E and say edge mark seam. There we go, and that's going to turn that thing red. Okay, so when it comes to bipedal characters, kind of like we're doing, generally you're splitting down either the side or the middle, and then you also want to split off any little appendage like this ear. So now I can also come in here and I can double click to select this edge loop. And if it doesn't like double click, I'll just have to come around and select it. In this case, turning off X-ray can be useful. Okay, and then I go Control E, mark seam, and we're just going to go all the way around and do this. You also want to think about the fact that you don't want to be painting across a seam where you can help it. Down here we can't really help it, but when it comes to the ear, I'd rather not have this be a seam because that's kind of the interior of the ear, but I'd rather have this outer edge be a seam. So let's mark that out. And you'll notice as I did this, so I marked out the place where the appendage attaches, I split down the sides, but then I also wind up marking out that kind of entire cap. And now we'll just do the same thing for the body, which is slightly more complicated, but not too bad. Okay, so once all our seams are marked, we'll go ahead and try to unwrap this model. Now you could see I was taking sort of a shortcut by picking this mirror plane as part of our seam. When I've seen this done in other cases, people will sometimes just make a continuous line that splits all the way down and around. And that may or may not work better for you. It just depends on what kind of texture you're trying to wrap around here. So your mileage may vary. You may need to do it differently than me. Okay, we're still in edit mode. I'm going to hit A to select all. And when I do this, I don't know if it's necessary, but I like doing it vertices wise. Then I'll hit U for unwrap and click on unwrap. And then we should see all of these items show up over here. I'll actually hit undo and do that again because I want to show the body and the head at the same time. So select A, we want to unwrap everybody, and I want to do them together because the computer is smart enough to put them all on the same surface at the same time. Okay, great. So if I switch now back into a render preview, we're going to be able to see that default UV grid pattern on here, and I can switch out of tab. Note that that will hide the layout here, but that's okay, we can get it back. And we did a pretty good job with laying out all of our seams and everything. You can see that we get slight distortions where the grid gets a little bit larger on the stomach where it stretches out and maybe a little bit tighter on different parts of the body. But these are looking pretty good. Now, if you're finding that you're getting some weird distortions on there, what you may need to do is get back into edit mode, select everything. You know, for example, I can switch over to the head, which I could do here through these layers, and mess around with how things are laid out. It can be a little tricky because it's hard to see things, so you can drag a selection box like that, but to prevent yourself from getting extra vertices in there, you can click on a single vertex and then hit L, and that's going to bring up everything that's attached to that particular panel. And now I can do things just like I'm used to in the 3D viewport, right? So I can grab to move things around, I can rotate things, I can scale things, and so forth. And as I do that, we'll actually be able to see changes made right here. Let me show you here, for example, as I scale this, we'll get to see the scale of the squares as they appear there on the nose. But really in this case, none of that's necessary, so I'm just going to hit undo and move everything back to where it was. Alright, so once we feel confident that we like how our default grid is stretching over our surface, we like the layout of our UVs, now we're going to switch this image out for one that we can actually paint on top of. So to do that, I come over here into the image editor, and we will make a new file. Let's call this one, instead of hippo.png, let's call it hippo skin. And we'll make it the same size, 248 by 248, or otherwise it'll come out distorted. We'll make it a background color that's generally hippo-ish, like this light purple. But then instead of the generated type being UV grid, we will say blank, and blank just will allow that color to come through, and I'll hit OK. So now I get something like this. We also want to make sure that this is saved, so we go to Image Save As, and I don't see it out here yet, so we want to save this as hippo-skin. Okay, now at the moment we're still going to see these UV grids coming up, and that's because the material is still associated with the hippo image. You know, to make that less confusing, we probably should have called that just UV grid or something. Anyway, to fix this, I'll come down here into this material, and I will disconnect the old image. And you can see that just returns me to a default color. I'll hit open. We'll go to hipposkin.png, that's the new one. And we should see both parts of the body adopt that particular color. Okay, great. Now we're ready to start painting. If you ever want to see these UVs come back up, right, there's two ways to do it. So I can switch over here to the UV editor, And then over on this side, I can select both these objects and then go over into edit mode. And as long as all the vertices are selected, we'll see where everything's laid out. And so again, this is your opportunity to move things around if you want them to have a different arrangement. You're particularly looking for things that are overlapping. So sometimes you might want to give stuff a little bit of breathing room. And in some cases, the unfolding will go strangely and you'll wind up with two pieces that are occupying the same spot on the texture map. And that'll cause problems, right? Because if I make a white dot here, I don't want it to show up down here as well. But this is looking pretty good. If I move this over to the image editor, I'm going to lose those UVs, but I'll be able to get them back as long as I click on View and say Display Texture Painted UVs. These are not actually on the image. They're just some guidelines for me to work around. Okay, so I'm going to head out here to away from edit mode and back to texture paint. You'll notice that when this image is, or rather this window is compressed down, I have to scroll back and forth to get all the options. So let's head down to texture paint. And then depending on which is our active object, so in this case it's the body, or I'll switch over to the head. These might be titled incorrectly, but in either case that's how we get both of those up. Let's see, is the head the head? Yeah, the head's the head. Okay, so let's start painting on the head. Got it, all right. So to do that, I want to come over here in the texture paint window and hit N to bring up this menu. As we go down through here, there's a bunch of options to be aware of. We currently have the brush selected, but if I look down here, I want brush settings to be mix. I'm working on a tablet with a pen with pressure sensitivity, so I can have the radius at a certain size and I can make that based on pressure. I'm just going to make the radius stay at consistent size, but the strength I'm going to move, somewhere around in here so that I can base that on the pressure of the pen. Why don't we start out with making eyeballs for this character, and we can also get into making palettes. You see that I've already got one here, so I might just delete this real quick and show you how to make it. Okay, so on the one hand you can just grab a color at random. So let's say I grab this white, I hide this menu, and then I have head selected, and I can get in here and start to make the eyes, so I might get a result that looks like that. That's based on my mirroring, so I'm just going to work on this side and get the other side. Looks like I need to work with a much smaller diameter, so F to change the diameter, and then I can make some eyeballs that kind of look like that. But if you want to have some consistent results, you'll want to start putting these colors into a color palette. So first you say New Palette down here, which I've already done, and then we can add one in. And then if you already did some palette work with your reference images, you can bring those into play as well. So if I bring back up my reference images, I notice that grabbing these colors acts a little bit weird if this isn't a full opacity image. So remember, we go back to object mode, and then we select the object properties and then turn this back up to 100%. But now what I can do is take those colors, hit N while we're in this window, and then click here, and then click here. Oh, having some trouble clicking. Grab my eyedropper, and then I can come in and eyedrop those colors right off the image. So I can take this kind of tan color, add that to my palette, click here, click the eyedropper, grab that pink color, and then just keep going like that. Gray, and let's go ahead and grab that black, which I don't know, maybe that's just black. I guess it's slightly dark purple. And that's how we build our palette. Okay, hide those reference images. Great. And so now we're ready to continue on painting in here. You'll see there's a relationship between these two sides. So as I paint onto this object, I should see those changes come up on this side. If I find those grids distracting, I can turn them off right here under View. And because we're mirroring, I only need to worry about making one side of this particular image. And at this point, it's really just up to you to do some work. I might just turn off my audio and fast forward for a little bit here while I add some details. Some other things that you can experiment with in the advanced section, you can turn on accumulate. So that way, if you're just making very, very light marks, right, as you make them over and over again, they'll sort of build up over time. Fall off is an interesting one that you want to play around with. So for example, here I have a fall off where there's a lot of kind of fade on the side. So if I blow this way up and just kind of show you what that looks like, you see how I really have to spend some time pushing down on my pen, and then I get that nice feathery edge. Here we go, getting my bearings. So if I want to get that nice hard edge and not have to worry about accumulating the stroke, I can just turn off the pressure sensitivity. However, even if I have the strength turned all the way up and I'm pressure sensitive, I'm still going to have to build things up over time, something like that. Another thing we can look at doing once we establish something like this, especially on the mirror line, which is a little hard to control, is we can actually edit things back over here in the texture map. So as long as I have the image editor set up and I'm also in paint mode, I can come in here and effectively erase stuff just by painting in the background color. So we'll get that purple back. Maybe we'll zoom in a couple more times and then try to get that looking nice. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an idea. Clearly, I just spent a little bit of time in here messing around, and this is the kind of thing you're just going to have to sit down with and do a bunch of practicing. But, you know, I can get in and give this guy kind of rosy cheeks. I could do some gradient on the ears and that kind of thing. I can work over here in the flat version if I find it a little easier, particularly when it comes to crossing over the mirrored territory. So I'm going to leave this up to you to practice. But a couple things to be aware of that are super important. One is that as I make these changes, they're not necessarily all going to be available if I preview this thing in cycles. So this image right here needs to be saved in order for that to show up. So I'll go to Image and Save, and then I might have to come over here and come back, and you'll see now that's rendering in cycles. Also, if I were to take the cursor and to rejoin these two windows like this, if I do that, I'll sort of break the connection between the two. And here I might have just done it by accident. So let's see if I can get my 3D viewport back. So if you close this image and reopen it again, I've found that there's trouble getting the cycles preview to update, and that's after all what we're going to be rendering. So here I can just test real quick and make sure, you know, if I make a line in here. So let me grab my colors and stuff. Here's my color palette. So let's say I make a pink line and that shows up over here. Good. So as long as these two are listening to each other, you're doing well. Just don't close this window while you're working over here on this side, or else you're going to have to quit the program, and that's the only place I've been able to find where it prompts you to save the image again. So we'll keep the relationship between these two going. You'll get this guy painted up nice and colorful. I'll bring back his pants. And then you're ready to do all the things we've talked about before in terms of establishing the lighting, putting in a background, and framing a nice composition, and then exporting a render. And there you go. Now you know how to model an Animal Crossing character and to UV map and texture paint it.